Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Thibodeau, and I'm the Pavement Management Chief at the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 9th and final session of this virtual National Pavement Preservation Conference. This session is focused on local agency experiences with pavement preservation. Speakers for the session include Aaron Gerber, Chris McGee, Todd Kinney, Austin Potts, and Richard Turner. Aaron Gerber is a principal at Kercher Group, focusing on infrastructure asset management, including bridges, pavements, signs, signals, pedestrian facilities, and maintenance management. Aaron has held a variety of positions with the Kercher Group over his 18 years with the company. Aaron is a member of the TRB committees on pavement management systems and pavement condition evaluation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, which is Aaron Gerber.
Yeah, my name's Aaron Gerber with the Kercher Group, and today's topic is going to be on some strategies that some of the local agencies that we've worked with can use to try to integrate preservation programs into their local agency pavement management. So let's start off with just a couple of kind of starting thoughts here. So, what strategies can a local agency use to improve their chances of adoption of a pavement preservation management approach? We all understand that this can be a difficult process, and a lot of times it can be difficult to get support either from your legislators or your administrators or even from the public on getting a lot of these programs up and running. They all tend to like to see the classic old-fashioned mill and fill approaches, but we can prove the benefits of using preservation in our pavement management toolboxes and how to manage the networks effectively. So there's a number of different ways we could run down into the corridors on this topic, but I'm going to focus on two main ones, and one of them being how do we level our program so that we're doing a consistent amount of preservation work across all of our years of our pavement management analysis period, so that an agency can manage the work that's coming in, that's being analyzed, and that the industry at large can be prepared for the work and can actually plan to be able to perform it. The other is the idea of grouping our preservation projects geographically to appeal to public acceptance and try to take advantage of some economies of scale by trying to pull the projects together into a location that can be delivered as one large package. And then ultimately what our goals here are today is to determine if we do this, if we change the profile of our analysis results from pavement management for our preservation program specifically, what are the impacts to our network condition if we do these kinds of manipulations to the program? So let's start with some strategic considerations for success. First, of course we have to start with knowing what we own and what the conditions are of our network. And that really starts by implementing a robust pavement management system. And ideally, a robust pavement management system is one where the output is a detailed project work plan. It has to have treatment-specific results so that you know which preservations are to be applied under certain conditions. It should have the ability also to compare competing analysis scenarios. And so when we think about whether or not we want to use preservation in our analysis, in our pavement management program, our larger program, or to not use it, or to change how we might use it, how much funding we might actually use in any given year of our analysis, we need to have a way to compete those results against each other to show the benefits of each. And then ultimately, optimization analysis process is a plus. It's not a requirement, but it is a plus. It really does provide you the ability to prove the benefit of preservation, because at the end of the day, these types of optimization type tools are generally maximizing network benefits subject to various constraints. So a couple of things I'm going to point to initially are a couple of project selection criteria that you could consider in your setup and in trying to determine how to trigger preservation treatments. And the two that I'm really going to focus on here, although there are a number of ways to do it, are decisions based on condition data metrics, the data that you're collecting today on the network condition, and also the use of construction history data to inform future project selections. And those types of things might be things like computing a pavement age, determining what the last treatment was that was applied to a location, And then also from that information, trying to determine treatment timing for various preservation treatments, knowing that various preservation treatments have different treatment timings, and then trying to cater to that in our setup in our pavement management system. So looking at an example from an agency that we work with, I just took a snippet of one of their decision trees, and I wanted to just kind of focus your eye on a few things that they're looking into for making decisions based on condition data. And one is the common one everyone is familiar with, although the actual index itself may be different, but to look into a range of condition index first and decide from there whether we should do the treatment. You could stop here and then just say, I'll do preservation, and then make it a project level decision of which preservation you do. But if you have the data, you could actually go a level deeper to specific distresses, looking at severity levels of those distresses and deciding from there which treatments apply best. And so if I look at a specific distress at this level, and then say I drop to a specific distress at this level, I can see that I'm making decisions on whether or not I should, say, crack seal a roadway. And if I go a level deeper, I can even say whether or not I should do, say, a thin overlay on that roadway, or a scrub seal, or any other type of pavement preservation treatment that you could apply. You could see how this process could be used in your program, depending on the data that you're actually collecting. This next slide, although I know it's a little small, I'm going to focus your eye a little bit here down the path on construction history data and how we might use that in the decision making. We all understand that construction history data can tend to be a little spotty, but when you do have it, and when you can get that database in good shape, you can make very good decisions out of it for preservation candidate treatments. A couple things to look at. We could look at the last treatment that was applied. So you could query the database and you could see really just yes, no, was the last treatment a reconstruction or a rehabilitation? So in other words, is the surface asphalt, or is it, does it have anything applied to it currently? If the answer to that is yes, then it may become a preservation candidate moving forward. So then you might look into the years since that treatment was applied, and then decide from there whether a treatment is applicable or not based on a counting of years in your analysis to see if you've hit that point in time where it's optimal to do a certain type of treatment. I could also go a level deeper down here where I look at the last treatment may have been a preservation that was applied, and I'm now trying to determine whether or not the next treatment that I apply would be appropriate or not based on the last preservation treatment that I've applied. And in this case, this agency is looking into not just the years since the preservation was applied, but how many consecutive surface coat counts are there on that roadway to say whether or not they should, say, mill off and start over. If in a case where maybe they're building up their section a little bit, the common thing that we see is, if there's a curb, if it's a closed section, you may want to mill off if you get to a certain amount because you don't want to lose curb reveal over consecutive counts. And different agencies have different rules on this, but ultimately you could set those kinds of things up in your decision tree if you have the data to support it. Speaking of optimization, I was talking about this a little bit earlier. I want to talk a little bit about what is benefit. What is about optimization that makes this this process very useful when we look at where preservation sits in your program. And so I'm going to start with an example, a very, very simple example. I have a before and an after picture here of a poor condition roadway and a good condition roadway. If you consider that essentially after treatment on that roadway, you get a condition score bump by a certain amount. So, it goes from a 30 to 100, I get a 70-point PCI increase. And then that I expect that treatment to perform or last, say, 20 years. For all intents and purposes, benefit is the computation of condition improvement times life extension. And so that kind of sort of two-dimensional kind of way of looking at benefit, more so than, say, just looking at, say, remaining service life of a pavement, but more so not just the remaining service life, but also the condition impact of having doing that treatment. Now, I understand this is for a reconstruction or a major rehab type of an example, but I'll show you how we compare that to how preservation works. Let's look at this a little bit more from an engineering standpoint, the way that we tend to look at these things. And you've kind of heard of this idea of, once a treatment is a road is constructed, it's going to deteriorate over years and it's going to hit some condition value, and you have to decide along the life of that pavement where you should perform your work. Well, if you wait until the end of life to do the work, yes, you will get that bump. You will get that. You do the major rehab, and then you get that bump back to 100, and then that's expected to last some amount of time. Going back to my previous example, add 70 points to the score, get 20 years of life. Benefit is essentially the area under the curve for that treatment. And so when you think of benefit in those terms, let's compare a reconstruction example or a major rehab example to what that looks like when we do preservation. If we catch the pavement a little earlier in its life, say around a very high condition score, better condition score, we can look at benefit in terms of life extension generally as the benefit still being area under the curve through that time period. Now, it's a smaller area, but when we compare those things, oh, by the way, I also realized that there are some treatments that are also not only going to give you life extension, they will give you a minor condition bump as well, because certain distresses tend to go away when you, say, recoat a surface of a pavement. You can likely reset some of the surface distresses like light cracking or oxidation and other things like that. So we do realize that, but in general, this is a way of thinking about it in terms of life extension. And that can vary based on treatment that's applied. Really, the power of optimization comes into play when I compare the two. When I start to look at things like the actual benefit area under these curves and their costs of doing the work, the benefit cost ratios then suddenly really come into focus. And this is really the crux of what we're looking at in a pavement management system to determine where and when to trigger certain treatments, what to fund essentially in an analysis. Now, these are actual benefit values. What I did was I just estimated them as triangles, and then just did 1/2 base times height, and I got a value for each benefit. And these are just associated costs for various treatments for certain agencies. But I realize that these can vary based on the treatments you apply and how much work is being done over each one. But in general, if you look at these two examples from that are pretty common, to compete with preservation, benefit of reconstruction or major rehab would need to be nearly 3 times more, or the cost would need to be 3 times less. And so when you look at those raw values themselves, you can see how in an optimization analysis, this can be somewhat of a challenge to manage. What we find is that, of course, with that understanding, we can treat 12 times the lane miles with preservation for the equal budget. And so just looking at the ratio of those two unit costs, I get to about 12.5. The implication of that is that you're touching a lot more lane miles, so you're actually improving the overall condition of the network. However, it doesn't stop there. We know that pure optimization it's great in concept, right? It gives us a great theoretical result, but it can be very difficult to deliver the project work practically. And that's where we have to then go and interject at a project level to determine exactly what it is we're going to do, and also to apply certain constraints to our analysis to try to better improve our output from the analysis. And so, as I say here, it has limitations for practical application for project work planning, even though it is the quantified best use of funds. So what are the other things that we really need to consider beyond just pure optimization of our budgets? Well, those are things that sometimes payment management systems don't know. And those are the things that you tend to know as an agency. And those are things like contractor availability. Whether or not you even have a contractor that performs that kind of work can really impact your overall program. Or if you have enough contractors to create competition for competitive pricing, that can be very important for all of this. You also want to make sure that they have the experience to do that type of treatment, and that they have the capacity to meet your needs. And these are the kind of things that you're always keeping in the back of your mind. Material availability. I mean, certainly there's certain treatment alternatives you might want to try to apply at your agency, but you might not have access to those materials where you are regionally. They may not have high quality or durability issues depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And there might be other factors you might be considering as well that may really limit the scope of what preservation treatments that you could apply. Some agencies are going to have seasonal constraints, and depending where you are in the world or in the nation, you're going to maybe have a very short window of time to actually apply certain treatments to have them perform well. A lot of times that has to do with temperature variations or the rainy seasons and other things that may occur. So you have to be wary of when you can apply these things. And then also just the agency capacity to inspect and manage those contracts. These become limiting factors to how many lane miles you can actually achieve in a given year in your agency, and they need to be considered when you do your final output of your work plan. So the goal really is to create a preservation program that an agency can manage, right? It's got to be big enough or small enough, or I guess big enough that you can manage with in-house forces or with contract forces, and that the industry at large can predict and plan for. They have to go staff up or buy equipment or whatever to meet your needs. As the sort of the workload grows, they're going to grow with it, but they need to know that you're going to commit to this work over a long period of time. And so how do they get that level of comfort? Your program needs to be kind of leveled for that kind of work. So let's look at a scenario. I ran two competing scenarios from an optimization analysis for out of Polk County system, Polk County, Florida. And I ran two various scenarios. One was I did a full optimization with no constraints on project selection. I just let the software decide what preservation candidates to pick anywhere it wants over a 10-year scenario. I determined from there the average yearly lane miles that generally appear to come from that result. And so the graphic here on the right, let me just kind of back up. The graphic here on the right is these are the lane miles of preservation that were recommended out of a much broader optimization analysis. I think I ran like a $30 million per year analysis, and the software selected this many lane miles of that from that money to do preservation treatments. And I just wanted to focus your eye to that. I went to look to see generally what's the yearly average of that should be done. And then I ran a second scenario where I set a constraint on preservation funds to try to achieve that average as best I could to hit those lane mile targets. And it turned out that if I took 10% of the budget and I allocated it specifically for preservation, I got pretty close to my yearly average lane miles. This really helps an agency plan better for how they're going to manage the contracts of this, and it helps the industry understand what they can expect into the future so that they can make the appropriate staffing and equipment purchases and so on. Another really important issue that's come up quite a bit with some of our client agencies is this need to group projects geographically so that they can get, one, better public acceptance of the work that's being performed, and also they can take advantage of the fact that they're not remobilizing into a location over and over again year over year. And what we found was that, so a lot of times, as you're probably all aware, if you have a pavement management system picking projects, they tend to scattershot those projects all over the network, however best spent the funds. It's not looking geographically, it's just looking for best use of funds. So when you run that initial scenario, you can run it free spend, and you can run it with the and that's what I've done here. This initial map of just one area I focused in on the county shows this is the results of the various treatments in various years for this area. And so what this could mean is that certain roadways might be getting rehab work, or might be getting some, at the end of the day, they might get some asphalt overlay work, and some might get some preservation work for doing surface coat work, or some may be getting no treatments at all. Some of our agencies find that it's better to do one global treatment at the end for aesthetic reasons and also for public acceptance reasons. And so what we have is a tool called neighborhood grouping analysis, which takes the results of an optimization and then it goes through and groups out the projects based across years and across treatment alternatives to try to better group them into results. And in this scenario, what we found was this neighborhood turned out to be a very good candidate for that grouping analysis. And so they all kind of came together into the same year, and it's going to be the same kind of work being performed. At the end of the day, what we realized was that it was important to be able to show that we want to be able to do those things, but we also need to be concerned with what is the impact to the overall network condition having made those kinds of adjustments. And you can imagine if you take a project from one location that was selected in a different year completely and move it up in time to marry it to another project and make a broader project, that's going to have impacts on the overall network condition downstream. And so the timing of all that stuff is very important. Also, the way you spend the funds can have an impact. So you look back at that leveling example. If I change the optimization to force the funds a certain way, I expect that to be a less optimal result, but a more practical one. The question is what are the impacts? What are the implications? And what we found was that the implications are very minor in these two scenarios. So looking at the three scenarios that I ran, the no constraint scenario, this is the trend. It's still going down, but this is the trend. The 10% preservation constraint, I found that we only lost about a point of PCI over that time period. And same with the NGA results. Moving them geographically also had very minimal impact on our overall condition. And so I think anybody who knows even 1 point of PCI can have a lot of money loaded behind it. But knowing that your overall condition trends are relatively steady, are relatively stable over that time is very important to know. And so, as I say here at the end is, we want to be able to plan leveling of our projects to be more predictable, and we want to be able to group them geographically to get better public acceptance. But at the end of the day, the agency needs to be able to manage it, and the industry needs to be able to predict it. They need to know that it's coming down the pike. And so, as I say, I think at the end of the day here, we found that the result was very good, and that agencies can feel good that they can make those kinds of adjustments with very minimal impact to their network conditions. And that's it. Thank you very much.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.